The chandeliers looked like frozen stars. My former girlfriend was laughing at me under each one of them. She stood at the top of the marble staircase. She wore a white gown that cost more than my apartment. Her hand rested on the arm of Adrian Lancaster. Adrian was the heir to Lancaster Capital. He owned islands, yachts, and probably a few politicians. He had never done a day of real work in his life. Vanessa lifted her champagne toward the crowd. Her voice carried across the ballroom, sounding soft and sweet. It sounded exactly as it did 10 years earlier, when she promised her love. Her guests received a thank you. Her new fiancé received another. Then, she thanked me by name with a cutting smile. Every year of my support was itemized aloud for the guests. She mentioned college meals and the rent on our small apartment. She included every dollar of tuition my paychecks had covered. Finally, she called me her stepping stone. Adrian laughed into his glass. He spoke loudly so every guest could hear him. He compared me to a dog that deserved a treat before being put on the street. The whole room laughed with him. 200 faces turned toward me. I saw politicians and bankers. Socialites wore dresses that cost more than my mother's medical bills. My cheap suit felt like a costume. My hands went cold. The ice in my chest was named shame. Under the shame, something else was breathing. I had stood in this ballroom before. Living this exact night was not new to me. Once, this same ballroom had broken me. Back then, I answered the insult with rage. Rage was the only weapon a poor man had. I threw my drink at his face. I called him exactly what he was. My voice shook as I told Vanessa what her soul was worth. Security dragged me out through the service entrance. By morning, I had lost my job. By that afternoon, my landlord put my things on the sidewalk. Every recruiter I called suddenly remembered another candidate. My savings vanished behind blocked accounts and frozen cards. Adrian had made a single phone call. My entire life had gone dark. My mother was in a hospital bed the whole time. She had stage 4 cancer. One surgery could give her another decade of life. A charity fund had approved the procedure. A week after the party, that approval was quietly rescinded. No reason was given. A stranger on a phone said the paperwork was denied. She died on a Thursday in a room with peeling wallpaper. She was holding my hand. Later that night, I climbed to the rooftop in freezing rain. The denied approval letter turned to pulp in my fist. I slumped against a rusted vent. I promised her ghost I would tear his world apart. I would do it if it took 100 years. 3 months later, a black sport utility vehicle without plates ran me off the road. I was traveling at 80 miles per hour. My car flipped 4 times. The driver got out to check if I was really gone. He was smiling in a way that made my stomach cold. Then the ballroom came back. Now I stood again under the same chandeliers. I wore the same cheap suit and heard the same laugh. I watched the same white gown. My hands had stopped shaking. 2 lifetimes of weight settled behind my eyes. Vanessa was still smiling, waiting for me to explode. Adrian was still swirling his champagne. He was waiting for the same performance. Every guest was waiting for the poor boy to break. That poor boy had already died once. He was not coming to the party this time. Very slowly, I set my untouched glass on the closest tray. I straightened my sleeve. I gave the woman I had loved a small, polite nod. She blinked. Confusion passed across her face. She had a script, and I had walked off the page. Adrian opened his mouth to press the joke further. I turned my back on him mid-sentence. I walked toward the exit. The crowd parted out of surprise. 100 conversations went silent behind me. My footsteps sounded very loud on the marble. Nobody laughed anymore. At the huge glass doors of the ballroom, I paused. Outside, the city was raining. Stepping into the rain, I left the scene behind me. Nobody followed. Nobody called out. Behind me, one man had lost a game. He did not yet know he was playing. 8 blocks of walking rain brought me to a small diner. It was located on the corner of Ashford and 9th. The neon sign buzzed a soft pink. The windows were fogged. Inside, a coffee machine hissed. A woman was mopping the floor. Her name tag said Sophia. She smiled like someone who had worked 12 hours. She waved a hand at any booth I wanted. I picked the one nearest the window. I set my soaked jacket on the seat. The vinyl squeaked under it. My reflection looked older than my 28 years. Sophia brought a menu without me asking. She brought a glass of water with 2 lemon wedges. That small extra lemon caught my attention. The old version of me would not have noticed it. I ordered the meatloaf plate and extra mashed potatoes. I added a piece of apple pie. She wrote it down in careful handwriting. Her pen hovered for a moment. Very softly, she asked if I was all right. She noticed my hands were still shaking. I said I had just left a party. I finally remembered why I was tired. She nodded like a woman who understood completely. She asked no further questions. Then she went back to put in my order. While I waited, something inside my head lit up. There was no pain or sound. Words drifted into my mind very clearly. It was a calm and formal greeting. It called itself a system. It said it had chosen me. When I spent money on certain people, it would return multiplied. I stared at my glass of water and waited. The words kept going. The system identified what it called eligible goddesses. These were women with real talent and loyalty. They were women drowning in difficult situations. Every dollar spent on them would return to me. The return would be a random multiple. All of it would be clean and legal. The system said the woman serving me was an eligible goddess. Sophia set the plate down with careful hands. Steam rose off the mashed potatoes. She refilled my water without being asked. Then she left me alone to eat. I ate slowly and thought. A decision formed inside me. An hour earlier, it would have sounded insane. The check came to $218. That was almost every cent in my account. The old version of me would call this reckless. Tonight, it felt like a coin toss made by a dead man. I paid the bill in full. I told Sophia to keep the rest as a tip. This was another $47. She tried to give it back. I refused gently. I explained that a stranger was once kind to my mother. I promised to pass that kindness along. It was a lie made of true pieces. Her eyes went shiny. She thanked me with small dignity. The tip would cover her sister's medication for the week. I asked about her sister. Sophia explained that her sister had leukemia. The hospital wanted $180,000. She was working double shifts for the payment. She would not make it in time. She did not say the rest aloud. I nodded slowly. The system spoke again. It congratulated me on an act of support. My expenditure was $265. Then, it multiplied the amount. My phone vibrated. I saw the bank application was open. The new total was $265 million. The numbers did not look real. I stared at them and refreshed the page. They stayed. I kept the phone hidden from Sophia. My hands were steady again. My mind was moving very fast. For 10 years, I had counted every dollar. I knew the cost of a broken heater. I knew the cost of a canceled surgery. In my previous life, money was a heavy weight. Tonight, money was a weapon on the table. A hospital was waiting for the payment. I watched Sophia wipe down the counter. She was humming softly. She did not know her life had shifted. The system listed her as an eligible goddess. It called her talent extraordinary and her loyalty rare. It suggested that more spending would trigger higher multipliers. I waved her over once more. My voice was calm. Very gently, I asked for the hospital name. She stopped wiping and frowned. I told her I was in a position to help. There would be no thanks and no debt. I would only provide the money. Then, I would leave if she wished. She sat down in the booth. Her cleaning rag fell into her lap. She stared at me for a long time. She whispered and asked why I was doing this. I told her the truth. If someone had helped my mother, she would still be alive. Sophia's face broke. She cried without a sound. Her shoulders shook. She let the tears fall onto the vinyl seat. When she could speak, she gave me the details. She asked what she could do in return. I told her to keep doing her job. I said a small favor might be asked later. She nodded like she was making a vow. I stood up and buttoned my damp jacket. I stepped back out into the rain. The city looked different now. The lights and streets remained the same. However, something inside me had shifted. I was walking away with immense power. Adrian Lancaster was somewhere across town. He was sipping champagne under crystal chandeliers. He laughed with the woman who used me. He believed he had ended me tonight. He had no idea what he had just started. The rain thinned to a mist. I reached St. Marian Children's Wing. It was a squat gray building by the river. Once before, I watched my mother die in a place like this. Tonight, I walked in with a wet coat and millions of dollars. The nurse wore reading glasses on a chain. I gave her the sister's name. I said I was paying the deposit in full. I did not need to be on the paperwork. She looked over her glasses and asked if I was sure. I told her I was very certain. $180,000 moved from my account in a single card transfer. The receipt printed with a small, polite beep. The nurse handed it to me. Her hand was trembling a little. The nurse said the child on the waiting list was not going to survive. Doctors could start treatment first thing in the morning. Her voice cracked halfway through. I left one small instruction. Sophia was to be told a private donor had paid. No name was ever to be given, even if she asked. The nurse promised. Walking out into the parking lot, I felt the system stir. Words assembled themselves behind my eyes. Unconditional expenditure recorded. The cashback multiplier was 1 million times. My phone lit up in my palm before I even lifted it. The bank balance now had so many digits I stopped trying to read them all. $180 billion sat quietly in an account. This same account had held $218 an hour earlier. Behind a wet hedge, on a curb where no one could see me, I laughed until my ribs hurt. Between the hospital and dawn, I spent 1 hour on a bench in a small park. The rain had stopped. The world smelled like wet stone. A stray cat watched me from under a shrub. Phone on my knee? I asked the system if it could show me more. It answered as if it had been waiting. A pale screen unfolded across the inside of my eyes. This was something only I could read. I saw a list of quiet numbers, multipliers, and chain bonuses. A small counter labeled Divine Cascade was still locked. I saw a tally of every dollar spent tonight and every dollar returned to me. The math was simple and unbelievable. Sophia's dinner had multiplied 1 million times. Her sister's hospital deposit had multiplied at the same rate. There was more to the system. The system explained its rules in a calm tone. My income would compound as I built a network of approved women. Their businesses would feed into mine. Their success would trigger passive returns for me for as long as they thrived. Cash was not the whole gift. It was a machine that would print money for the rest of my life. I only had to give without asking anything back. I looked at the river. At 18, this discovery would have made me weep with relief. At 25, it would have sent me to a bar. I would have drunk until I forgot my mother's face. The man on the bench that night was different. He had already learned what wealth without patience looked like. He watched a billionaire cripple his life over a single moment of anger. Adrian was not getting that gift from me again. Getting to my feet, I pocketed my phone. My legs still ached from the walk. My clothes were still damp. The city hummed around me, big and unaware. Somewhere in an uptown penthouse, Adrian was probably kissing my ex-fiancé. He would sleep well tonight. He believed his cruelty had cost him nothing. His sleep, from tonight on, was borrowed time. The walk home gave me an hour to plan. Money alone would not reach Adrian. Not yet. If a man suddenly walked into a bank with $100 billion, regulators would be at the door. Rich people were paranoid of new money. Adrian's family was more paranoid than most. Their private security firm had a large payroll. Last time, they sent a man in a sport utility vehicle to kill me. They did this for far less than my current worth. If I wanted to touch them, invisibility had to come first. I needed a face for my money that was not my face. I needed paperwork with a name that was never mine. I needed someone smart enough to run a fortune this size. She had to be loyal enough that she would never ask why. She was already known to me. She was mopping a diner floor 8 blocks away. Sophia could not carry it alone. To bury Adrian Lancaster, a team of overlooked people would be needed. This would include doctors, designers, engineers, and traders. These were women the system would multiply money for. I would build a quiet army out of talent the world had ignored. Pushing myself into a faster walk, I turned east toward home. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, I had reached my apartment. The building smelled like fried onions and old cigarettes. My landlord's cat watched me climb the stairs. Inside, I sat on the edge of the mattress and opened my laptop. The screen was cracked and the battery was old. None of that mattered. Money buys new technology, silence, distance, and time. Before the sun was fully up, I had made the first of many careful moves. A wire transfer went to a small law firm 3 states away. This firm specialized in privacy and asked few questions. Instructions were simple. Register a holding company in a jurisdiction that did not report ownership. Give it a bland, forgettable name to avoid attention. Draft a private trust with a nominee as the public director. Put my name nowhere. The first company got a title, Vale Meridian Holdings. By breakfast, it existed on paper, and the world did not yet know it. In a few months, that name would sit at the edge of every deal on Wall Street. Within a year, it would own more of Adrian Lancaster than his own father did. Closing the laptop, I looked out the window. Delivery trucks, sirens, and a pigeon on a wire filled the view. The world had no clue that its financial map had started to redraw itself. Before I let myself sleep, one final stop had to be made. The diner opened at 6. I walked in 5 minutes after the door unlocked. Sophia was still there. She had not gone home. Her apron was fresh, but the skin under her eyes said she had cried for hours. She saw me and froze while pouring coffee. Very carefully, she set the pot down. She came from behind the counter. She hugged me before I could even sit down. It was not a long hug. The hospital had called her at 3 in the morning. Her sister would start treatment at 9. The last 3 hours had gone into pouring coffee so she would not lose her mind. The truth about where the money came from stayed with me. Instead, I sat at the counter and ordered a black coffee and a plain bagel. When she brought them, I asked her a strange question. Would she be willing to work for a small company that was about to grow fast? The pay would be indecent. At some point, the work would be dangerous. She did not ask a single question. She only said yes. I nodded and sipped the coffee. It was terrible coffee. It was the best I had ever had. Walking out of that diner, I felt the shape of my new life begin to settle. One woman had said yes. Somewhere in a tower downtown, a boy was dreaming of a future that no longer existed. Back at my apartment, I did not go straight to bed. I took out my phone and opened a news app. I searched for a name from the timeline I had escaped. I looked for a young medical researcher. Her experimental cancer drug would one day cure the disease that killed my mother. In the past, her funding was stolen and her name was buried. Her name was Maya Chen. According to the news article, she was about to lose her lab. She had until Friday. Setting my phone down, I let a small smile find my face. Sophia had been the beginning. Maya was going to be the second brick. I had all the money in the world to build with. Sleep came in short pieces. My old mattress dug into my ribs the way it always had. By 9 in the morning, I was showered and dressed. I stepped into the back of a cab I could finally afford. The address was a squat brick building on the edge of the industrial district. A rusted sign near the door said Kellerman Research. On the 3rd floor was the last working lab of a woman about to lose everything. The elevator was out of service. 6 flights of stairs got me winded. At the top, a small paper sign read Chen Molecular Oncology in blue marker. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lab was smaller than a classroom. I saw 4 benches and 2 centrifuges held together with tape. A whiteboard was covered in complex equations. In the middle of the room, Maya Chen was carrying a rack of glass vials. She looked up when I came in. Her hair was in a low ponytail. Her lab coat had a coffee stain. Behind her glasses, her eyes were red. She asked if I was from the leasing agent's office. Very calmly, I told her I was not. Her shoulders dropped a little. She set the vial rack down and asked me to leave. She did not have time for a sales pitch. Perching on a stool, I said I had come to buy her research. Her jaw tightened. She looked at my cheap shirt and my damp shoes. Her voice went flat as she spoke. She had already turned down offers from famous companies. She was not interested in being lowballed by a stranger. I asked her what had happened to her funding. The pain in her face slipped out. Then, in short sentences, she told me. Her grant had been pulled by a private foundation. The new chair had ties to a large pharmaceutical firm called North Star Biotech. North Star made her 3 offers to sell her data. She had refused each one. A week later, her rent had suddenly tripled. Her equipment supplier stopped extending credit. 2 of her lab assistants had left for job offers in California. North Star wanted her cornered. They wanted her work for scraps. They were going to succeed because rent was due Friday. Her hands were shaking as she picked up the vials. Listening, I felt something old and mean stretch in my chest. North Star Biotech was a name I remembered too well. In the timeline I had already burned, The family of Adrian had bought North Star 3 years from now. Adrian had used the acquisition to hide a truly terrible secret. That secret was going to destroy him eventually if I set the trap correctly. Maya's stolen research had been a small piece of the same corruption. This time would be different. Very quietly, I told her that I was not from North Star. I was not going to offer her a low price. I was going to pay her rent for the next 5 years in full today. Her equipment credit was going to be restored in cash by the end of the week. Her patent filings would be moved into a trust. The sole purpose of the trust was to protect her work. All of the work stayed in her possession. Nothing changed hands except the licensing fee. She quoted a fee to license her platform to a small holding company. Nobody had heard of the company yet. She stared at me the way a person stares at a hallucination. Her voice came out very quiet. She asked for my identity. I answered with a small, polite smile. I said I was a stranger who had once lost someone. This happened because a woman with a research file like hers was not funded in time. She sat down slowly on the stool opposite mine. She did not cry. Her tears had all been used up in the night. What passed across her face was something more useful. It was a fierce and wary kind of hope. She named a licensing fee of $240,000. I doubled it in my head without a flinch. I told her that Vale Meridian would pay $480,000. Half of the money would be wired today and the rest on Monday. She would keep full intellectual property rights. She would receive a monthly research budget of $1 million. This money would be transferred without any conditions. In exchange, Vale Meridian would hold a quiet minority share of the revenue. This would only happen when her platform produced its first commercial therapy. The number I offered her was more money than her family had ever seen. It exceeded the combined wealth of 3 generations. Her lips parted, but she did not speak. Very slowly, I opened my banking app. I turned the phone toward her. I let her watch me transfer the first $240,000. She pulled up her small business account on a cracked tablet. Her fingers had gone numb. The confirmation chime was the loudest sound in that laboratory. Behind my eyes, the system stirred like a big animal turning in its sleep. Unconditional expenditure was recorded. The cashback multiplier became active, and the chain bonus triggered. My phone buzzed against my palm. The banking screen refreshed on its own. The number in my account had grown a new set of digits. I no longer had names for these numbers. Somewhere north of $600 billion sat calmly in a checking account. I had opened this account in college to hold my part-time paychecks. Keeping my face still, I slid the phone back into my pocket. Maya was staring at the vial rack on her bench. She looked as if she had never seen it before. Then she looked at me carefully. She asked what I actually wanted from her. Only one thing was asked in return. When her cure was ready, 100,000 doses were to be set aside. These were for people who would never be able to pay. Distribution would run through a foundation. Vale Meridian would help her build this foundation. Her name would be on the door. She got up from her stool and walked around the bench. She hugged me quietly. Her lab coat smelled faintly of antiseptic and burnt coffee. She did not thank me in words. She did not have to. Leaving her lab, I felt like a man who had just dug a moat. I did this around my mother's grave 20 years too late. The cab ride back into the city gave me time to think. I had found 2 eligible allies in less than a day. My bank account had swollen into a number no human had ever seen. Somewhere in the world, algorithms were tracking large wealth movements. They would already be noticing the activity. Compliance officers at banks would soon start filing suspicious reports. Regulators would surely follow. This was why the money had to stop being mine on paper. It had to happen before the sun went down. By noon, I was sitting in a small private office building. It was located on the west side of Midtown. The law firm I hired at dawn had already sent a partner. She met me in person after traveling across state lines. She was in her 50s and had silver hair. She was sharp as broken glass. She asked me exactly 3 questions before signing my paperwork. None of the questions were about the source of the money. Vale Meridian Holdings became the legal owner of the funds. This was finalized by the end of the meeting. The corporate structure had 11 layers between the money and my name. The identity of the nominee director was not chosen yet. A slot was left blank on the form. That slot was reserved for Sophia. At 2 in the afternoon, I walked back into the diner. It was located on Ashford and 9th. Sophia had not slept either. The manager had let her clock out an hour early. This happened after she mentioned her sister was starting treatment. She was sitting in the booth by the window. She wore a denim jacket over a plain white shirt. A financial analysis textbook was open in front of her. It was the second edition of the book. The pages were dog-eared and covered in tiny, neat handwriting. She used 3 colors of ink for her notes. She looked up when the bell over the door rang. I slid into the seat across from her. I placed a folder on the table between us. A pen sat on top of it. She stared at the folder for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Her voice was very quiet when she asked what it was. Speaking plainly, I told her the truth. The folder held employment papers for a chief operating officer. This was for a private holding company called Vale Meridian. It also held director paperwork. Her salary would start at $1 million a month. She would have full authority to sign for the company. This applied to transactions up to $50 million without consulting me. Above that amount, she would only need to make a phone call. The company already had capital. It had a great deal of it. The company held more than any bank in the country for a single client. That number was going to grow. She sat very still. Her pen hand stayed in her lap. In a voice that was almost a whisper, she asked if this was real. Sliding the pen across the table, I told her to take her time. She could tear the paperwork up. She could walk away tonight and never see me again. Her sister's treatment would still be paid in full through completion. Nothing about this offer was leveraged against her family. Nothing was contingent on her answer. My only condition was that if she took the job, she would never lie. I would never lie to her either. The corner of her mouth trembled. Very slowly, she picked up the pen. She asked me only one question before she signed. She wanted to know why I chose her. The honest answer came out easy. I explained my reasoning clearly. A woman who studied finance in a diner after mopping floors was impressive. She had proven she was smarter and more disciplined than men in glass towers. She signed the papers on the counter of a coffee-ringed booth. A truck rattled past the window. A jukebox played an old country song in the corner. I handed her a new phone. It was a prepaid and clean device. I told her to call the number saved as Alpha in the contacts. That was our lawyer. Everything else would be arranged by the end of the week. An office was already being leased in a small, unmarked building. It was on the 32nd floor of a tower on 57th Street. Staff would be hired quietly one at a time. For now, her only job was to rest for one full day. I told her to buy her sister a new pillow. She should buy her mother a new stove. She should eat a proper meal in a chair that did not squeak. She held the phone against her chest. She treated it like it was a small, warm animal. Turning to leave, I paused with one hand on the door. Very softly, she called after me. She asked if she could know my name. I told her that my name was Ethan Vale. She nodded slowly. She did not repeat it out loud. She would not do so for a long time. Sophia understood that my name was a valuable secret. She would be trusted with it. Walking out into the afternoon light, I felt the pieces settling. The next afternoon, I went hunting for the third brick. This was my third day awake in this second life. I already knew her name. In the burned timeline, she had built a fashion empire from nothing. She then saw it swallowed by a distribution war. She had been too small to survive it. Adrian's cousin had been on the board of the conglomerate that ended her. Her name was Elena Rossi. She worked in a small boutique on the ground floor of a mall. It was located on the west side of the city. The place sold discounted last season pieces to teenagers. Elena was the assistant manager. She was 26 years old. Her real work happened at her kitchen table at night. She used a second-hand sewing machine and rolls of fabric. She bought these at a bulk discount from a warehouse 3 subway stops away. The mall was busy that afternoon. A children's choir was singing carols near the fountain. Escalators hummed in the background. Somewhere, a security guard was chasing a child. Inside the boutique, Elena was folding sweaters at the front table. She used a quick and practiced motion. Her hair was in a tight bun. Her name tag was slightly crooked. She had the alert and tired eyes of a woman working 2 jobs. She slept only 4 hours a night. I wandered in like any other customer and picked up a scarf. I added a jacket and a small silk blouse to my items. My arms filled up with clothing. The register clerk was a bored teenager. She assumed I was shopping for a girlfriend I would not name. At the register, my total came to $460. Very casually, I asked the clerk if the assistant manager was available. I said a brief conversation was needed if she could spare the time. Elena came over cautiously. Her voice was polite and guarded. Without raising my voice, I asked her a simple question. I asked if she was the designer of the pieces in the front window. She hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the window and then back to me. She said no. She claimed the pieces were from a French label the company licensed. Watching her carefully, I picked up the silk blouse. Very quietly, I told her the stitching on the cuff was not French. The lining did not match the label. The pattern of the seam matched 3 other pieces on the sale rack. All of them were attributed to the same French label. In each case, the stitching gave the secret away. Someone in this shop was making pieces at home. They were quietly slipping them into the store to test them. Her whole face went pale. Very softly, I told her nobody was in trouble. Nobody was going to be reported. I asked if she would come outside with me for 5 minutes. She agreed. We sat on a bench near the fountain. The children's choir had moved on to a song about snowmen. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. Her hands were long and thin. They were the hands of a person who spent much time sewing. Speaking softly, I told her the pieces in the window were beautiful. They were the best things I had seen in years. They were made by someone with a real eye for design. This person understood proportion and drape at a high level. Most designers in Paris had forgotten these skills. That talented person was not in Paris. She was folding sweaters for $12 an hour on a Tuesday. Her lips pressed together, but she did not deny it. The pitch I gave her was short and clear. A holding company called Veil Meridian was investing in independent designers. She was going to be offered $2 million in seed capital. This would cover a studio and a fabric budget. She would have a small team of 5 people to hire. She would have full creative control. She would also have full ownership of her brand name. Veil Meridian would take a silent minority stake. We would open the right door for her at the perfect moment. This would lead into a major department store chain. They would carry her line internationally. The only condition was that she leave her boutique job by the end of the week. She needed to focus full-time on her own work. There were no exceptions. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She did not cry. She only looked at me for a very long moment. Then she asked if I understood what I was doing to her. I told her that I did. She said her mother spent her life sewing for other women's labels. Her mother died still hoping for a chance her daughter never got. Very gently, I told her the chance was on the bench beside her. She signed the intake form on a clipboard. I had brought the form in a canvas bag. We were right there next to the fountain. A choir was singing about snow. $2 million was scheduled to hit her account by end of business. The system did what the system always did. Unconditional expenditure was recorded. The chain bonus began escalating. A notification appeared stating that the divine cascade was unlocked. That last phrase was new. The pale screen in the corner of my vision expanded. A soft, warm light bloomed across it. Numbers began to move at speeds I could not track. Every prior expenditure from the past 48 hours was being recomputed. The system used a higher multiplier for everything. This included Sophia's dinner and tip. It included the hospital deposit and Maya's licensing fee. The system politely referred to this as cascade compounding. My phone did not buzz this time. It just went hot in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened the bank application. The number on the screen was incredibly long. The application formatted it in scientific notation for a half second. Then it switched back to full digits. Commas kept marching to the left. My eyes traveled across 12 digits and then 13. The balance had crossed $1 trillion. I sat very still on that bench. A choir of children continued to sing about snowmen. I understood the situation without the system needing to tell me. In the space of 2 days, I had become the wealthiest individual in history. Nobody looking at me could tell. My cheap shirt was still slightly wrinkled. My shoes still needed polishing. A pigeon landed near my foot. It pecked at a piece of pretzel. Elena had already gone back inside to finish her shift. She was that kind of woman. She would work her final week and train her replacement. She would leave with her head high. In 3 years, her label would be on runways in 6 countries. I stood up and dropped $5 in the tip jar. Then I walked out of the mall. By nightfall, I was on the 32nd floor of the tower on 57th Street. The office had been leased that morning by our lawyer. It consisted of 3 rooms. There was a reception area with no receptionist yet. The conference room had a long, dark table. A corner office provided a view of the park. Nothing was on the walls. Sophia was already there when I arrived. She had traded her denim jacket for a plain black blazer. She bought it at a department store an hour earlier. The tag was still tucked inside the sleeve. Her hair was up and her heels were new. She sat at the conference table with a laptop open. 2 other people sat with her. Both were women. Our lawyer had spent the day interviewing quiet and overlooked talent. One was a former analyst named Priya who was 31. She had been passed over for a promotion 3 times. A managing director did not like her style in meetings. She quit that morning after Sophia offered double her salary. The other woman was named Rachel. Rachel was 42 and a former financial crimes specialist. She worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She left the bureau 6 months earlier when her father got sick. She needed money and engaging work. Sophia had promised her both. They stood up when I walked in. I waved them back down and took a seat. I pulled a plain manila folder from my bag. Very quietly, I told them what Vale Meridian was going to do. We were going to move slowly. In the first 3 months, we would take small positions. We targeted undervalued companies with sound fundamentals. We looked for leadership that was currently distracted. Nothing would be flashy or large. This would build our reputation as a patient and quiet fund. In month 4, we would begin purchasing distressed debt. We would buy any Lancaster Capital paper that came for sale. We would buy in small tranches. No single desk in the city would notice a pattern. Priya would run the acquisition. Rachel would build the shell entities. Sophia would sign every document as the face of the fund. In month 6, Lancaster Capital was going to acquire Northstar. That acquisition was going to be a massive mistake. Priya frowned and asked how I could possibly know that. I told her very calmly that a source inside Northstar shared evidence. Certain trial data on their flagship drug had been fabricated. When that information became public, the stock would collapse. Any company that leveraged itself to acquire Northstar would fail. They would be unable to service their debt. Sophia's eyes stayed on my face. She did not ask me who the source was. She had already decided that I was allowed to keep secrets. Priya nodded slowly as she ran the math. Rachel asked if any of this was illegal. I told her not a single line of it was illegal. Every acquisition would be at market rate. Every debt purchase would be public. Every filing would be clean. We simply knew things before other people did. She gave a small and satisfied smile. She had spent 20 years chasing rich men who cut corners. Working with a rich man who did not seem refreshing. I told the 3 of them to run the office. Any decision under $50 million was theirs. Above that, they would call the number saved as Alpha. Alpha would then call me, and only me. I said that nobody was to speak my real name out loud. They agreed to these terms. Walking out of that meeting, I felt something click into place. It had been loose since my mother died in a different life. The pieces were finally on the board. Downstairs on the sidewalk, my phone buzzed with an alert. Lancaster Capital had announced its intent to acquire Northstar Biotech. The deal was expected to close soon. Adrian's father had just walked his family to the edge of a cliff. I had spent 2 lifetimes preparing for this. I let a very small smile find my mouth. A black sedan pulled up to the curb and slowed. The tinted rear window rolled halfway down. Adrian Lancaster was looking out at me from the back seat. Adrian asked me softly what a poor boy was doing there. The streetlight above me buzzed softly. Cars slid past behind the sedan. A woman walked her dog nearby. Meeting his eyes, I answered him plainly. I told him I was just walking home from a job interview. My tone was flat and tired. I sounded like a broken man. His smile widened. It was a smile I remembered from a rooftop and a hospital. A part of me wanted to reach through the window. That part of me had to wait. Adrian tilted his head. He said he thought he recognized me while driving past. He asked if I was still crying about the engagement party. He mentioned that Vanessa had been worried about me. He called her a kind girl. He said she hated to see old dogs put down badly. Every word he chose was like a small knife. Very evenly, I told him I was fine. Then I asked a question about his fiancé. I asked if she knew he took long drives alone at night. His smile faltered for a half-second. Something curious flickered behind his eyes. He laughed and said he wanted to give me advice. He called it a final favor for the years I wasted. He said my kind needed to accept where we belonged. He claimed that trying to climb out of the mud brought trouble. He hoped I would remember that. I thanked him for his concern. My words were polite and my face gave him nothing. He waited another beat while watching me. When I did not show anger, his smile thinned. A small frown pulled at the corner of his mouth. That was not the reaction he expected. His window rolled up and the sedan pulled away. I stood on the curb long after the lights vanished. I let a very small breath out through my nose. He had come looking for a repeat of the ballroom. He had wanted to see me shake. My steady eyes had unsettled him more than he admitted. Somewhere inside that expensive suit, a small alarm had begun to ring. Above the rooftops, the city was quiet. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a message. Priya had already placed our first 3 purchases of Lancaster paper. These were small tranches that would not raise any eyebrows. The trap had begun to close. I felt the weight of 2 lifetimes become lighter. The next 3 weeks moved in a blur of work. Sophia grew into her office role quickly. By the second week, she had hired 6 more analysts. By the third week, our floor had extended to a second suite. Nobody in the building knew the name behind the company. To the doorman, we were a small fund. Priya turned out to be worth every dollar. Her purchases of Lancaster paper were surgical. She never took a whole block from any single desk. She rotated our shells across 4 brokers. The paper came to us at pennies on the dollar. The market considered Lancaster Capital a safe blue chip. Rachel built the shell structure like an artist. By the third week, we held 23% of the paper. None of it traced back to us. Maya's lab moved into a new facility with 3 floors. She hired 16 new researchers. These were talented women who had been passed over elsewhere. Her first breakthrough came in her 4th week. It was a refinement of a molecular delivery platform. Her name was quietly filed on 3 new patents. Elena hired 5 staff members. She brought on a cutting master and a sample maker. She also hired a textile buyer and a production coordinator. Finally, she hired a creative director who had been let go from a major Italian house. Her first collection of 10 pieces was quietly under construction in a converted loft. Sophia's sister completed her first round of treatment. The bone marrow numbers returned exactly as the doctors had hoped. Sophia cried on my shoulder in the elevator when she shared the news. This was the second time she had cried in front of me. It would be one of the last times. On the 22nd day, Adrian struck. The first blow landed on Elena. She called Sophia in tears from the loft at 11 at night. Her fabric supplier had suddenly refused to fulfill her next order. No reason was given for the refusal. The next morning, her landlord terminated the lease on a technicality. Elena had 30 days to vacate. That afternoon, 3 boutique buyers withdrew their meetings. A pattern was clearly forming. Sophia relayed the news over the phone. She used the calm, neutral tone she reserved for when she was angry. I sat in the corner office and watched the sun set. I asked her whose name was on the eviction filing. She named a small property management firm. Rachel conducted a quick search and found the answer within 11 minutes. The firm was a shell company. Its ultimate owner was a real estate holding entity in Delaware. A private trust owned that entity, and a law firm administered the trust. Adrian had noticed Elena. He did not care about fashion. Vanessa had mentioned a poor girl from the mall who suddenly had money. Vanessa had a good ear for such details. She likely suggested to Adrian that they should destroy the girl. Adrian probably laughed and made a phone call. He believed he was merely crushing a hobbyist. I stood up from my desk and told Sophia to buy the loft building. We made a cash offer at 15% over the market price. The deal would close within 72 hours. We offered the fabric supplier a 5-year exclusive contract at premium rates. The first year was prepaid on the condition that Elena remained their top priority. We informed the boutique buyers that a major department store had already picked up Elena's line. If they wanted access after the launch, the price would double. Sophia made a satisfied sound on the other end of the line. She promised to have it done by Friday. By Sunday morning, Elena owned the top 3 floors of the building. Her fabric supplier's trucks were parked outside her loading dock. 2 of the 3 withdrawn buyers had already called her assistant back. They apologized and begged for meetings. The 3rd buyer did not call. Elena instructed her assistant to never accept a meeting from that 3rd buyer again. We absorbed the first blow from Adrian. The second blow came 3 days later, and targeted Sophia. A gossip column in a small financial tabloid ran a short item. It noted that a former waitress ran Vale Meridian Holdings. The article asked why serious investors would trust hundreds of millions of dollars to her. It mocked her for only having experience setting up salt shakers. Two larger outlets picked up the story by lunchtime. By evening, 3 financial talk shows referred to Sophia as the diner girl. Sophia read the coverage while sitting at her desk. She did not blink or cry. She looked at me across the office and asked how I wanted her to respond. I told her to accept a single interview with the largest financial network. Their morning anchor was known for being tough on new managers. Sophia was to wear her plainest suit without makeup or jewelry. She would wear her hair as she normally did for work. She was not allowed to use notes. Sophia asked me what she should say. I told her to say whatever came out naturally. She had spent 10 years studying finance in a diner. She knew more about complex debt structures than the men mocking her on television. She only needed to be herself for 8 minutes. Nobody expected her to survive on that stage. I added one more instruction. The anchor would likely mention the recent acquisition of North Star Biotech by Lancaster Capital. When he did, she was to say that our due diligence standards differed. Then she was to move on. Sophia repeated the sentence back to me. Her eyes became very still. She understood immediately and did not ask for context. She trusted that the context would eventually arrive. The interview aired on Wednesday morning at 7:15. Adrian was likely still asleep. His father was probably having breakfast at his club. Neither of them saw it live. Sophia sat across from the anchor in a plain gray suit. Her hands were folded on the desk. The anchor opened the interview with the diner girl comment. Sophia smiled and told him she preferred to be called a diner woman. The audience in the studio laughed. For 6 minutes, the anchor tried to shake her confidence. He asked about complex debt instruments and tax treatments. She answered in short sentences with numbers he had to write down. He asked about the current yield curve and small cap value. She corrected 2 of his premises and offered a third idea. His questions became more respectful as the interview continued. In the 7th minute, he asked about the North Star acquisition. He wanted to know if Vale Meridian would consider a similar investment. Sophia looked at him with steady eyes. She stated that our due diligence standards differed. The anchor blinked and changed the subject quickly. By lunchtime, her statement appeared on every financial blog in the country. By dinner, 3 journalists were asking about the clinical trial data for North Star. By the following morning, a source was willing to leak information. Adrian's father called an emergency board meeting that Friday. The stock was down only 4%. Analysts were being reassured, and the chief executive officer was appearing in photographs. On the surface, the situation seemed containable. Below the surface, we were buying more Lancaster paper at a discount. Priya moved into the second phase of the plan. By the following week, we held 31% of their outstanding paper. Adrian came looking for me again on a Tuesday night. He arrived in person at a small restaurant near my apartment. He must have followed me for days to find this location. The restaurant was a cheap, family-owned Vietnamese place. I sat in the same corner booth I had used for years. His entrance turned every head in the room. His coat cost more than the monthly rent for the restaurant. He slid into the seat across from me without an invitation. He waved off the owner and ordered nothing. He just leaned back and watched me eat my noodles. I calmly asked if he frequently followed people into cheap restaurants. His smile widened as he explained his research into my past. He had spoken to my old bosses, landlords, and classmates. Every one of them described me as harmless and quiet. They said I was reliable and never made trouble. Adrian thought I should have accepted my humiliation at the party. However, I walked out of that ballroom with confidence. This behavior bothered him, and he wanted to understand why. I set down my chopsticks and asked if he had considered my indifference. I told him I no longer cared what he or Vanessa thought. He replied that nobody stops caring about his family name in this city. He asked in a soft voice if I was planning to leave. I met his eyes and said I had no plans to leave. He offered me a job at one of his father's companies. It was a warehouse position on the docks during the night shift. He said the pay was $12 an hour. He claimed the honest labor would suit my talents. He offered to hire me the next morning as a personal favor. In exchange, he wanted a signed letter of apology for Vanessa. He planned to read the letter at their wedding rehearsal dinner for entertainment. This would supposedly give Vanessa closure. My former self would have felt humiliated by this offer. My current self simply finished chewing my noodles. I calmly told him no. His smile faltered and his eyes narrowed. He claimed I did not understand the offer. I told him I understood perfectly, but my refusal was final. He looked at me for a long moment and tapped his fingers. He spoke in a dangerous voice that showed he was rattled. He told me to be careful. He said the city was larger than a small man could imagine. He warned that bad things happened to those who did not know their place. I softly told him I had heard that line before. I noted that it did not end well for the last person. Something curious flickered behind his eyes. He sensed a puzzle that he could not solve. His instincts were beginning to whisper that this situation might be dangerous. He stood up and straightened his coat. He said he hoped we would meet again soon without smiling. I watched him leave while my noodles got cold. The owner came over and asked if I was all right. She had been watching us from behind the counter. I nodded and told her I was fine. She patted my shoulder as she cleared the empty seat. She said men like that only visited poor neighborhoods for two reasons. Either they wanted to buy the block, or they had already lost something. Her instinct was better than she knew. During the following week, the company known as North Star finally cracked. An investigative piece ran in a national newspaper on a Monday morning. The reporter found 3 former North Star research assistants who signed sworn affidavits. Trial data on the flagship cancer drug had been fabricated. Patients in the Phase 3 trial died from side effects. These deaths were quietly recorded as unrelated events. The primary researcher on the trial received a settlement for early retirement. This payment was given in exchange for silence. By the opening bell that morning, the stock for North Star was down 42%. By noon, the value had dropped 67%. Trading was halted at 1:15 in the afternoon. Lancaster Capital had absorbed North Star into its books 3 weeks earlier. The stock for Lancaster Capital opened down 12%. By lunchtime, the value was down 23%. The company's convertible debt covenants began triggering automatically. 2 of the largest creditors requested emergency meetings with the Treasury team. Sophia sat at the head of the conference table that afternoon. She had 3 phones in front of her and a very calm expression. Priya and Rachel were each on a phone. The third phone was waiting for a special call. Very quietly, Sophia gave the order to begin Phase 3. Every Lancaster note we held was presented for immediate repayment. This was done under the acceleration clause of the debt. The clause had been buried in the boilerplate for 4 years. Nobody had ever exercised the specific clause before. The holder could demand full repayment within 7 business days. This applied upon any material adverse change in the business. The North Star collapse qualified as a material adverse change. This was confirmed under the plain wording of the clause. Rachel had our legal opinion on paper by 2 in the afternoon. At 2:15, Priya faxed the first notice to the Treasury desk. 2 minutes later, she faxed the second notice. By 4 in the afternoon, she had faxed 143 notices. Each notice was signed by a different shell entity. Each notice was routed through a different law firm. Each one demanded immediate and full repayment of the principal. The combined value of the debt was $14 billion. Lancaster Capital had roughly $2.5 billion in cash. Adrian's father received a call from his treasurer at 4:30. He was on the 11th hole of his golf course. His caddy later reported the incident to a friend. The friend told a journalist that the old man turned very white. He asked to be driven back to the clubhouse immediately. Adrian got the news at 6 that evening at a bar. Vanessa was on his arm during the call. By 7, the emergency board meeting for Lancaster Capital had convened. Every major creditor was listening on the speakerphone. The creditors demanded to know why the debt notices had arrived. They refused to extend any additional credit to the family. This refusal remained in place until the situation was clarified. At 9 that night, the stock lost another 40%. At 10 o'clock, the private banker in Zurich called the family. The bank was reviewing their line of credit against personal assets. Nothing had been terminated yet, but nothing was being extended. At 11, Vanessa called Adrian in tears from their penthouse. The concierge spoke to her in a very polite voice. The building board requested a meeting regarding their maintenance fees. A black sedan pulled up to my apartment building at 6. Adrian got out of the car wearing yesterday's shirt. His hair was uncombed and his eyes were red. The doorman let him up after receiving a $100 bill. He knocked on my door at 6:17 that morning. I wore a plain undershirt and old jeans to the door. I looked at him without any expression at all. He quietly asked me if he could come in for a minute. I stepped aside and let him into the room. He stood in the middle of my small apartment. He looked at the cracked laptop on my kitchen table. He saw the mattress on the floor and the single mug. His hand went slowly to his forehead as he looked around. He asked me if I knew a man named Charles Whitfield. Whitfield was the partner of the firm that signed the notices. Very calmly, I told him the name meant nothing to me. His eyes searched my face for a long moment. Slowly, his shoulders dropped as his paranoid theory faded. He rubbed his face with both hands in frustration. He sat down uninvited on the edge of my mattress. His expensive coat pooled around him on the floor. He softly told me that his family was in trouble. $14 billion in debt had been called overnight. His father had not slept and his mother was crying. Vanessa was even talking about postponing the wedding. He looked up at me with the eyes of a boy. He asked if I had any contacts from my clerk days. He needed someone to lend the family a little money. I sat in my kitchen and looked at him. I told him I would ask around for help. He stood up and tried to smile at me. He said he appreciated my willingness to help. His hand extended toward me for a final shake. I took his hand, which was cold and slightly damp. I closed the door quietly after he left. I opened my cracked laptop and messaged Sophia. I told her to deny every request from the family. I instructed her to accept no restructuring of the debt. I told her to move directly to Phase 4. Her reply came back in less than 30 seconds. Phase 4 moved very fast for the Lancaster family. Every restructuring proposal they submitted was rejected within hours. Every offer of collateral was declined by our office. Vale Meridian would only accept full principal in cash. No exceptions or extensions were granted to the family. Adrian's father tried every door in the city that week. Every door in the city closed politely in his face. His private banker in Zurich stopped returning calls on Tuesday. His golf club suggested he take a leave of absence. His tailor demanded full payment before delivering his suit. Nobody said the word bankruptcy out loud yet. The word was in every room he entered. Vanessa's world crumbled in smaller and quieter ways. Her personal stylist stopped taking any of her calls. Her favorite table at the restaurant was suddenly unavailable. 2 of her bridesmaids called to withdraw from the wedding. The wedding planner requested a meeting to discuss revised terms. Adrian and Vanessa still stood together in public. Behind closed doors, they were screaming at each other. Rachel intercepted a series of text messages between the couple. She reported that the relationship was already broken. It was only being held together by mutual convenience. By Friday evening, Lancaster Capital had one hope left. A charity gala was scheduled for Saturday night. The event took place at the Ashmore Hotel. Every major financier and old money family would attend. Adrian's father needed a loan of $2 billion. He believed someone in that room would say yes. Sophia and I made sure no one would help them. Our people had visited each of the powerful men. These were small and polite conversations over coffee. We laid out the facts of the North Star exposure. We also mentioned the many acceleration notices they received. Vale Meridian had taken positions in their own companies. Lending to Lancaster would clearly displease Vale Meridian. Displeasing our fund was not considered a wise decision. All 3 men decided they had prior commitments. Sophia and I arrived at the gala at 7:30. She wore a long, dark green gown cut simply. She wore a small pair of earrings from her sister. Her hair was down for the first time. She looked like she was born in a boardroom. We stood at the top of the marble staircase. She softly asked me if I was ready. I told her that I was ready for this. The ballroom was the same place as before. The same chandeliers and marble floors filled the room. Adrian's father looked 10 years older than before. The skin under his tired eyes was gray. His tuxedo hung loose on his thin shoulders. Vanessa was on Adrian's arm near the fountain. She was visibly afraid for the first time. Nobody in the ballroom looked at me that night. In my rented tuxedo, I was an anonymous guest. Sophia drew a few appreciative glances from the crowd. Nobody quite recognized her in the gown yet. We moved slowly through the crowd. Sophia paused to speak warmly with 2 elderly women. These women had once been kind to her mother. I stayed a step behind her. My eyes tracked the room like a man tracks a chessboard. Adrian spotted me first. His head turned and his eyes narrowed. He said something to Vanessa. She turned toward us as well. The face of Vanessa went through 3 expressions in 1 second. These included confusion, recognition, and anger. They crossed the room together. Adrian reached me first, with Vanessa half a step behind him. His smile returned. It was the same smile he wore in the sedan. It was the same smile from the Vietnamese restaurant. Very softly, he asked me how a warehouse clerk got a ticket. The ticket was for a $50,000 per plate charity gala. I answered him with a small, polite smile. I told him I had come as a guest of Vale Meridian Holdings. The smile of Adrian faltered. The eyes of Vanessa looked toward Sophia. Recognition was slow when it finally came. Vanessa had never watched the financial news in her life. Her eyes traveled from the gown to the face of Sophia. Slowly, a memory surfaced of the interview and the diner girl. Sophia turned her head slightly. She met the eyes of Vanessa and gave her a small, warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who spent 12 hours on her feet. She had poured coffee for people like Vanessa. She listened to their conversations. She remembered every rude thing they said to a waitress. The mouth of Vanessa opened, but nothing came out. Adrian recovered more quickly than she did. Very softly, he asked how a broke clerk became a guest of a private fund. The father of Adrian appeared at his shoulder before I could answer. The old man noticed the small gathering near the champagne fountain. His eyes went from the face of his son to my face and stopped. His face turned a shade grayer. He recognized Sophia immediately because his generation watched the financial news. His voice was very careful. He asked her if she was the managing director of Vale Meridian Holdings. Sophia smiled kindly and confirmed that she was the director. The hand of the old man tightened around the glass. He turned to me. His eyes did the work his mouth was too slow for. He was trying to place me, but he failed. He never learned the name of the boy his son humiliated months ago. Adrian had not made the connection yet. He was still looking at Sophia with narrowed eyes. In a cold voice, he asked if she knew about the aggressive acceleration campaign. He claimed the campaign was destroying the company of his family. Sophia tilted her head. Very softly, she told him she was fully aware. She had signed each of the 143 notices herself. The face of Adrian went white. The old man took a step forward and placed his glass on a tray. He addressed Sophia in a voice used for boardrooms. He wanted to discuss a small private matter immediately. He invited her and her guest to a private lounge. Sophia looked at me. I nodded and gestured toward the corridor. The 4 of us moved through the crowd together. Heads began to turn, and curiosity followed us. Half the ballroom knew something was happening. The lounge door closed behind us with a soft, heavy click. The old man did not sit down. He spoke in a very controlled and tight voice. He acknowledged that the notices were valid. However, Lancaster Capital was unable to meet them in full. He offered a restructured payment plan. He promised full principal within 18 months. He offered a generous premium on top of the face value. He also offered personal guarantees on his private assets. Sophia listened patiently with her hands folded. When he was done, she looked at me. I stepped forward for the first time. Very calmly, I told the old man that Vale Meridian was not interested in restructuring. He turned to me as if noticing me for the first time. His eyes narrowed. In a distracted voice, he asked who I was. He asked why I was speaking in a private financial discussion. I met his eyes and told him my name was Ethan Vale. The face of the old man remained still for a full second. Then something behind his eyes moved. He turned his head slowly toward his son. His son was staring at me with a blank expression. He looked like a man standing on glass. I told the old man that Vale Meridian Holdings was always mine. Sophia was its managing director, but I was the sole owner. Every decision over the past 6 months was my direction. My lawyers drafted the 143 acceleration notices. I gave instructions to block the emergency loans. I carefully designed the ruin of his family. I was the man his son told to know his place. The legs of the old man gave out. He sat down heavily in a leather chair. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The face of Adrian went through 5 expressions in 3 seconds. He showed confusion, disbelief, rage, and fear. Something small and childlike remained underneath it all. Adrian whispered my name. He said it as if he had never heard it before. In a way, he had not. He never bothered to know my name. He had called me the clerk and a dog. Very softly, he asked me how this happened. I stood very still. I told him he had not earned the right to hear that story. Vanessa went completely silent. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were fixed on me. All color drained from the face of Vanessa. She looked at a man she lived with for a decade. She realized she had never truly seen him. The father of Adrian found his voice again. It was a small and broken thing. He begged me for mercy. His family lived in this country for 6 generations. His grandfather built the firm from a small brokerage. His mother was 92 years old and lived in a house. He mentioned his grandchildren and his employees. 2,000 people worked for Lancaster Capital. He claimed they had done nothing to deserve this. I let a quiet silence sit in the room. Very calmly, I told him the truth. His employees would be fine. Vale Meridian prepared to acquire the assets of Lancaster Capital at fair market value. Every employee would be offered a job at their current salary. They would receive a modest raise. Their pensions would be honored in full. His grandchildren would find the world kind if they worked honestly. I would not touch the house of his mother. It would remain hers for her entire life. The son of the old man and the fiancé of his son were another matter. I turned slowly and looked at Adrian. I told him that in another life, he made a phone call. He blocked an elderly cancer patient from receiving surgery. That patient died 3 days later in a hospital bed. She was holding the hand of her son when she died. Adrian did this because that son threw champagne at him. The son had been publicly humiliated at a party. The face of Adrian went slack. He whispered that he had no idea about those events. He claimed he never did such a thing. I nodded slowly and said he had not done it yet. But I remembered. The mouth of Adrian opened and closed repeatedly. He did not know how to react to my words. His whole body began to shake very slightly. Vanessa took a small step forward. Her voice was a whisper as she said my name. She spoke the way she did in the old days. She said we had loved each other once. She said we could talk about this. She said it did not have to end this way. I felt nothing as I looked at her. It was not rage or sadness. It was not even satisfaction. I felt the way a man feels about old furniture. He realizes he no longer wants it in his house. The feeling was calm and empty. I told her very evenly that we never loved each other. She used me and I let her. That was the honest sum of our decade together. There was nothing to talk about. There would be no starting over for us. She would leave the hotel tonight. Tomorrow morning, she would begin the slow life she was headed for. This was before she attached herself to a rich boy. The eyes of Vanessa filled and her face crumpled. She reached for me. I took a small step back and let her hand fall. The father of Adrian spoke from the chair one last time. His voice was hoarse. He asked if he could offer anything to help his son. I met his eyes and spoke plainly. I said his son could keep his life. That was the mercy I was extending. In the previous life, the son of the old man ordered a man killed. In this life, his son would live. He would live poor and obscure for the rest of his years. He would know every meal came from the charity of someone else. He would never work honestly enough to earn one himself. I told the old man that this was mercy. It was more mercy than his son ever showed anyone. I turned to Sophia and gave her a small nod. She opened the lounge door. Half the ballroom was clustered in the corridor outside. They pretended to admire the paintings on the walls. Waiters found reasons to be near the hallway. 2 powerful bankers stood near the door with drinks. We stepped out into the corridor together. Sophia stayed at my side. Adrian and his father and Vanessa remained in the lounge. They were silent and unmoving. The crowd parted for us in the ballroom. It was like water moving around a stone. Nobody spoke or laughed. An orchestra was still playing a slow waltz nearby. Every eye in the room was on me. An old man in a fine tuxedo stepped forward. He was one of the 3 most powerful bankers. He extended his hand and asked for an introduction. I took his hand and introduced myself as Ethan Vale. I am the owner of Vale Meridian Holdings. He nodded and said it was an honor. He hoped we might do business in the coming months. A small, quiet line was already forming behind him. Sophia and I stayed for exactly 20 minutes more. Then we walked out of the ballroom together. Adrian came running after us in the lobby. His father stayed behind in the lounge chair. Adrian caught up to us at the revolving door. He grabbed my sleeve with wild eyes. Very softly, he begged for mercy. He offered the penthouse, the cars, or even Vanessa. He wanted me to spare some small piece of his life. I looked down at his hand on my sleeve. I carefully removed his hand. Then, I quietly told him something. I remarked that dogs should know their place. His face went ashen. He knew the line. He had said it about me once. He recognized it now like an old wound being reopened. His hand fell away. Turning from him, I stepped into the revolving door with Sophia beside me. On the other side of the glass, a black car was waiting. We got in and drove away. Adrian stood in the lobby of the Ashmore Hotel for a long time that night. He did not know where to go. His father was still inside the lounge. His fiancé was somewhere in the crowd, sobbing quietly. By the following Tuesday, his penthouse would no longer be his. By the end of the month, his inherited fortune would be gone. He would live another 40 years. He would never again own anything of value. Vanessa's next decade was quiet and unremarkable. She moved to a small city in the Midwest. She worked at a mid-tier real estate office. She married a middle manager. She had 2 children. She did not think about me often. When she did, she felt a small, dull ache under her ribs. She could never quite name that feeling. Adrian's father died 3 years later of a heart attack in a rented townhouse. His obituary ran in the local section of the paper. 3 people attended his funeral. Adrian himself vanished from public life entirely. Some said he had become a consultant somewhere in Florida. Others said he had gone to Europe. Nobody in the city we once shared ever spoke his family name with any weight. Decades passed. Maya Chen's cancer therapy was refined and expanded across 20 years of work. This work quietly saved between 4 and 7 million lives worldwide. She won 3 international prizes. She never gave an interview without mentioning the anonymous donor. She did this warmly. That donor had funded her lab the week she almost lost it. Elena Rossi's fashion house grew into a large, privately held luxury brand. She opened a school in her mother's name in southern Italy. The school trained young women from working-class families in design and pattern making. Thousands of graduates went on to their own careers. She never sold the house. It stayed private, and it stayed hers. Sophia and I never married. Our bond was not that kind. We shared the bond of 2 people who had built an empire together. We understood that the other would always be there without needing to say it. She had her own family in time. She had 2 daughters. Her husband was a kind and quiet high school teacher. She remained the managing director of Vale Meridian for her entire working life. Vale Meridian grew into something that no textbook could name. On paper, it was a diversified holding company. In practice, it was a quiet global infrastructure of anonymous emergency funds. The organization provided hospitals, scholarships, and small business loans. Every city on 6 continents had an office. None of those offices carried my name on any door. In the 40th year of my second life, I stood on a stone terrace. It was at the top of a building we built in the north. It was a hospital. It served children whose families could not afford care. Its doors had never turned a single child away. On the lobby wall was a small plaque with 2 names on it. One was my mother's name. Below hers, a small line was dedicated to a woman I never got to save. Sophia stood beside me. Her hair was silver now. Her eyes were the same. Very softly, she asked me if I ever regretted any of it. I thought about that for a long moment while looking at the city. The lights below us stretched out to the horizon. Somewhere below, a young man sat in an apartment above a laundromat. He was probably counting his last dollars and wondering whether he would eat that night. Very quietly, I told her the truth. I told her that I only regretted one thing. I wish I had been given a second chance sooner. She nodded because she understood. We stood together for a long time as 2 old friends. We were on a terrace above the city. Without knowing it, the city had been remade by a boy. That boy had once been laughed at under a chandelier. Somewhere down below, a hospital light stayed on all night. A child slept without pain, in a bed that cost her family nothing. A young woman in a diner poured coffee for a stranger. She thought briefly about her own dreams. The wheel kept turning. I had put my hand on it. That was enough.